The last major step before gloss top coat is finish primer, and that's what this is right here. As you see it here, I've sanded it with 320 grit. Just to lightly scuff the surface. If there are any flaws in the paint, then it gives you the opportunity to sand them out. I think I sanded out 2 small drips, both in the same spot. It was just a place where the spray gun ended up too close to the hull, and I saw it when I did it. But otherwise, other than final preparations, this will be ready for top coat, which is the next major step that's going to happen. This boat's going to be white, snow white, which is a nice color, or lack of color, whatever you want to call it, but it's a nice white. It's my favorite white. I actually don't think I've ever used a white other than that. I've used off-white, never used another kind of a clean white. Snow white is the one for me. But this is ready to go. There will probably be a touch up here and there when I get up a little closer. I've vacuumed and solvent washed this, so it's dust free at the moment. There'll be another solvent wash later, and I've got some more cleanup to do in the shop to get ready for top coat. But my next step following this particular segment is to strike the boot top. Waterline's been struck. The boot top will be 2.5 inches amidships visual height. So this is the sanded finish primer. More to come. This is the aft end of my setup for striking the boot top or the waterline, either one. In this case, this is going to be the boot top. I began by setting this beam up at the level that I struck earlier for the waterline, because that's a known level, and I needed the boot top to be 2.5 inches higher than that. So I had to start with this beam at the my original waterline height for a reference, because this was all dismantled in between, so there's no way to mark it or anything for easy reference. So I started there, and then I measured up straight off the top of the beam, 2.5 inches. Made a little mark on the center line of the hull. Then I raised this beam up until it's even with that mark and level side to side. So as you can see here, it's level. I have the level clamp to the bottom because there's not clearance on top. And then as I raise the camera up on the center line of the hull, there's a small tick mark. That's the 2.5 inch level that I marked before. And this beam is even with that and horizontal from side to side, level. The boat is also level. I did that early on in the project. It's crucial to this system. So this beam is now at the height of the top of the new boot top, which is 2.5 inches visual height in the center line. Here I've carefully pulled both of my side sawhorse supports forward a bit until this beam just barely touches the hull. You can see that tick mark right where the beam is touching. And that is 2.5 inches above the water line, which is this other tick mark. And it's much wider in this dimension here, but that's because the hull slopes from the side. It's 2.5 inches above. So I bring the beam up till it rests right on that center line point. This is a view from the top side of this beam. Again, horizontal out to the sides. Horizontal and level. I don't know if they're synonymous or not, but in this case they are. And the beam is just touching that hull right there. So the line that I'm going to string across the top of this is at that height. And that line is what establishes my boot top. Here in the bow is the corresponding setup. It's the same deal as the stern, horizontal beam across, set at 2.5 inches above the water line that I struck earlier. Now here on the bow, because the bow is a steeper angle than the stern, I could use a small square and make a mark. So I didn't have to start with the beam at the waterline height. That saved some time. And that's where that beam is resting right now. This boat's pretty high and has a deep draft, so I have to do a lot of ladder work for this, which I often don't. But there's the mark right there. Beam is right at that height. It's level, horizontal. And this is the same height relative to the boat as the stern, 2.5 inches above the waterline. This bow section will get sheared by eye later, but I'm going to strike the level line first. And the whole point of all this, which I'll show you as I climb up here, is these stick out past the side of the hull, and then I'll string a line between the two, and you can see that gives me room outside the hull so I can run a line, touch it amidships, and then slowly pull it in towards the ends. So that's what all this silliness accomplishes. Took about an hour to set these up. A little longer than usual because of all the ladder work. I can't do it without a ladder. So that's the basic part of this setup. The next part of the setup is a taut string run between these two beams, one side at a time. This is the last piece of the boot top striking puzzle. This line is strung tautly between the stern beam and the bow beam. And right now it's just touching amidships. I'll show you that. And my weights are very high tech. Just some gallons of whatever I have on hand. So there's the tight line. And here amidships, or roughly amidships, maximum beam. It's just barely touching. Just barely touching the boat. And it's, let's see if I can show you this, my artful camera work. 2.5 inches above the line of the water line, which is this top tape mark right here. So if I hold that out so it's level, if you can follow that 2.5 inch line, which is right where the square is located, that's the height of the boot top. Visual height. It's actually wider than that if you hold it down like this, but that's not what we're going for. This is what I measured originally, and it's a good height for this boat. So that's what we were going for with those beams at each end, was to get this line at this level, amidships. So now what I'll do is I'll tape it right here in the center where it's touching, and then slowly, bit by bit, I'll pull that line closer to the center line on the beam, and until it just touches the hull again. Then I'll tape the line and continue. And I tape the line so that it can't move. If I just pulled the line in under tension, it would bow down here in the center under the tension. So by taping it, it holds it. And I'll show you this as I go a little further along. So with the line touching and taped from back here at the aft beam, just lift up the line, pull it in a little closer to the hull until it touches about as far back as I think it can without starting to distort. In this case, it's about 6 or 8 inches back from where I taped it. You can see it's now touching about here. Got it taped in 3 places. This was the last place I made a touch. Right there is where it's touching, so I'll get some tape and tape that. Every time I pull it in and tape it, I put tick marks, one on each side of the tape. That's the whole point of this exercise. So a few minutes and, I don't know, 15 or 20 marks later, this is what we end up with. Every one of these tape marks, I just put a little pencil mark on each side, right above the string. I always go above the string. You could go below. But this line is now, it's still level from bow to stern because the tape's holding it that way. So it's just like it was before I pulled it in. But as I pull it in, it creates the curve of the boot top. Viewed from the side, this would appear as a straight line, just like the surface of the water would. It's hard to visualize probably through a camera, but this is what gives you a nice boot top that looks right to the eye. Stern cutwater is always the hardest place to pull this in. It gets very tight. And there's multiple curves going on here, but this is what we end up with. And it should look level with this beam right here. As much as I can hold the camera. And that's the goal. Do the same thing at the bow. The bow is quicker because the shape of the boat is much straighter. Once I had all those tick marks from the string, I took down all the beams and stuff and get those out of the way. And then I masked to the bottom of that line. You can just see the pencil marks above that tape, basically masked right to the lines in most cases. The stern here with this little curve where that point forms, that took a little work by eye to get the line visually right. And I do that by looking at it from eye level like that. You can see how it straightens out when I do that. But in reality, it's a curvy line. So I taped both sides just below that line because the boot top will start here and come down to the top of the bottom paint. And above this line is hull color, which is what I'm going to paint next. I taped this level planar line all the way to the bow. That's the bottom tape here. But then, because it doesn't look right if you don't do it, I sheared the top of the stripe, starting about 10 feet aft, which is a couple feet behind the stand. It's right on this mark right here. So I started the tape there, and then by eye, I pulled it forward to a new mark. I made a new mark 1.5 inches above the original, and that's at a 90-degree angle. So visually, it's 1.5 inches higher. And I just formed that line by eye on both sides. Took a reference measurement or two to see that they were more or less the same. They need to be basically the same, but if they're not exactly, if every inch of the line is not the same, no one ever notices. You can't see it. And anyway, the hull's not the same side to side anyway. They never are. So I sheared that. That makes it visually wider at the bow, and that's important because the bow sections fall away to the eye towards the waterline as it gets narrower. And if you leave it at that straight and planar line like the bottom one, it makes it look like it gets narrower. So the shearing is subtle. I don't want it to look curvy or swoopy or like an English pilot cutter or anything, but it needs to be wider. And this is how I do it. And I found 1/3 to 1/2 of the waterline length aft is a good place to start. In this case, that's about where the boat starts to really curve in again after maximum beam. That happens to be 10 feet. I just made a few marks and chose the one that I thought looked right. And then stretch that tape by eye. I attach it at the aft end and then stand out and stretch the tape out and pull it in towards the mark I made at the bow. And that creates that line. I'd say that's all there is to it, but there's an eyeball thing that you have or you don't have, or you can learn over time. I don't know. I don't have a problem doing it by eye. There's probably other ways to do it. All I can talk about is my way. So anyway, that line's now taped on both sides. That's the final top of the line. And in the center here, from here to here, in a vertical line is 2.5 inches. And that's essentially the width the boot top will look all the way along, which is a good width for this boat. Again, back here, you can see how curvy the line is from underneath, but as the camera raises to eye height, it straightens out, and that's what we want here. I don't shear the aft end, so I don't think it's necessary. All the final stages of prep for top coat are now done, and this is ready to go. Next time I'll be spraying the top coat. Got the boot top taped off, covered with paper below that new line. Hull's been cleaned a couple times, solvent washed. Do a tack off right before I paint. Got all kinds of extra lights up. I have these fluorescents which have been here for 20 years and really should be replaced, but haven't been. And then I have these LEDs and some other lights that I hook up when I paint top coat. You really can't have too much light on the hull. It's very hard to see where you've been spraying. And knowing where you've been is the key to a good job, because otherwise you overload it or miss a spot, or so you've really got to see where you've been. So the more light, the better for that. So I've got all this set up, and it's pretty good. It works pretty well. I also wear a headlamp when I spray, so that helps too. The top coat is the final major step. This boat's going to be snow white, which is going to look great. It's a nice color. If you don't want a dark color, it's hard to beat snow white, in my opinion. It sounds like I'm walking in a cave. It's because the floor is wet at the moment. So the next step from here, gloss top coat. My least favorite thing to do, and the most ultimately satisfying part of the whole gig, because when that's done, the boat looks fantastic. So all I have to do is do it. And that's going to happen right now. This is the morning after. Yesterday I applied 3 coats of this snow white gloss top coat. Spray applied. I'll do a quick walk by. It's always nice to come in first thing in the morning, the day after, and see what it actually looks like. So I finished the last coat, spraying, and I put the gun away, and I get out of here. So I don't really have a good chance to look at it until the next day. And one never knows. But this is looking nice. There is something about a nice bright white hull. I'm a big fan of colors, but this looks really nice. So I won't be able to do anything to this today. The next step will be to paint the boot top. And in order to do that, it means I have to cover this entire hull with plastic and paper. I don't know if I actually have to. I always do. I can't bear the thought of overspray or anything getting on this fresh paint. So I cover the entire thing above the boot top, and that means I have to wait till this paint is at least tape dry. And that's not today. That'll be tomorrow. Anyway, there we have it. Top coats. Looks good. Definitely an improvement. So I've spent a few minutes unmasking what I can, like this hardware here on the transom and the top edge of the boot top, which I'll show you as I walk around. But I peeled this tape off because that doesn't need to be covered anymore, those through holes. And I pulled the paper and tape off where the boot stripe is going to be. You can see the non-shiny area below. It doesn't stand out much because it's also white. I have to let the hull paint cure today. And then next time I can mask off the top edge of this boot top, mask the entire hull, and then spray the boot. And that'll be the last painting step on this. Again, you can see the eventual boot top area where it's not shiny. It's still white at this point. Look forward to getting that painted tomorrow, it should be. Anyway, that's about it for what I can do on this hull today. Spraying the boot top is quick and easy, but it takes a huge amount of prep. Here I've covered the whole boat up to the gunnels with plastic sheeting. That was the first thing I did while I still had staging. Securely taped at the top, securely taped at the bottom. You can't see it, it's behind this plastic. I've got the top of the boot stripe taped off with 2 layers of tape. I have this blue vinyl tape that's underneath. That's a fine line tape that stands up to polyurethane paints, LPUs. The regular fine line I've found bleeds. So I use this, but because it's so shiny and it doesn't absorb paint, the paint will run when it's on that tape. So I cover it almost completely, certainly as much as I can with the green tape. And then because I don't trust the plastic against overspray, not at this level, and also because the plastic is shiny, I put the paper on above the boot top. I don't know if that's necessary, it's what I like to do. So all of this is necessary for this silly little 3-inch wide stripe. But boot tops look good, so it's worth it. So I started this morning doing all this prep, and now I'm ready to start spraying this boot top. Starboard side is the same. Got everything covered. Shouldn't be any chance of overspray on the new white. Better not be. So, time to get on with it. Time to spray. Here's a quick walk around to show the boot stripe the morning after spraying. This is Stars and Stripes blue. 3 coats. And I'll show you more once it's unmasked later. Looks real nice. Can't wait to see it all untaped. Nice shine on there. Soon the big reveal. So let's have a look at this hull after painting. This will look even better in a couple more days. Get the bottom painted, get a cove stripe on. But all the paint work's done at this time. Looks nice. Nice to see the fresh varnish against the fresh white. It's a good look. It's one of the greatest looks there is, actually. This is obviously a vast improvement over what I started with. And we'll get the final details taken care of in short order. Cove stripe, name, and paint the bottom, which will hide that ugly strip underneath the boot top there. Closing in on the final appearance of the exterior. Today I painted the bottom just to, well, the owner wanted to paint it before the season anyway, but this really finishes things off. Otherwise it never quite looks right till the bottom gets painted. So it took care of that ugly sanded area beneath the new boot top. Nothing special about the bottom paint, it's just bottom paint. But having the bottom refreshed really kind of starts to finish things off. Working on the name and hail port, that'll be installed when it's done. Got a local shop, talking with them about that. Bottom's the bottom. And it looks good, but the cove stripe's really going to bring things out. It's amazing how a little piece of striping can make a huge difference in the appearance of a boat like this. So at long last, here's the completed hull refinish. Actually, it's not really that long last. It's been just over a month since I started. But we're complete now. Got a new name. Well, it's the same name, new graphics. Blue over black. Match the rest of the boat. Use a local shop for that. Place I've been using for years. Got the cove stripe in place, also blue, to match the boot top as closely as possible. That little cove stripe makes a huge difference to this boat. It's hard to imagine how a 1/2-inch stripe can do so much, but to my eye, it's everything. It was boring looking without this, and now just this little bit of a stripe and just kind of brings the whole boat together to me. But here we go. On this boat, it definitely looks good. I like to end it about 3 feet from the bow and about 1 foot from the transom. I think that looks best. They don't look good when they go too close to the ends. So that dressed it up pretty nicely. Get another look at this eventually when it leaves the shop, but that's going to be a couple months. But I'm happy to have this paint done. I think it looks great. Got the staging out of the way, which is always nice. Can actually walk around here, maybe do some other things in this side of the shop. But this looks a whole lot better than it did a few short weeks ago. Paint, it's good stuff. Makes a difference. This name I mounted as high as I could, just below those vents. There's really no way to go any higher. The ladder in the way. The name is arced slightly to match the camber of the transom. The port is horizontal, level, because I think that looks best. Same font and size and everything as the one that was on there before that I put on. We just changed the color. So there you have it. One Cape Dory 31 refinished. There's a few projects left on this boat, but all the big jobs are done now. The varnish, the non-skid, and of course the hull.